in the waiting room.
Should I wait till everybody's in to introduce Megan and Melissa?
Yeah, wait till everybody's in. It's going to take a few minutes.
Okay.
Hey, y'all, welcome. Come on in.
Hi, everyone. We have a lot of people to let in, so this might take a minute or two.
And while we're letting folks in, we should go ahead and say that you're welcome to have your cameras on or off. We love to see faces, but please make sure that your microphones are off. And this meeting will be recorded. So if you don't want to be, and we're hopefully going to be live on Facebook in a minute. So if you don't want to be on Facebook, you might want to turn your cameras off. I'd like to give that little. Welcome, everyone. So great to see y'all. Hello, hello. Welcome. Dylan, do you want to go ahead and put up the first slide so folks, when they're coming in? There we go. Welcome, everyone. Oh. Hello, welcome everyone.
Hello, this is Minerva.
Hello, hello, good afternoon, good
Hello.
evening, good evening.
Welcome, y'all. We're just letting folks come in and we'll get started here in just a minute.
Talk about safety as what other, this is why I think it would probably be better talking about the cumulative effect.
Everyone,
Welcome, everyone. Just a reminder, as you come in, please put yourselves on mute.
welcome, welcome. I think looks like we're slowing down. We'll get started here in just a minute. All right.
Okay, shall we go ahead?
Yeah, I think we should go ahead.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Wheeler with Indivisible Guilford County. And before we start tonight, we want to make sure that everyone knows how to use the Spanish interpretation feature if needed. So tonight we have Megan Morrissey and Melissa Murrell to explain that. So Megan and Melissa, go ahead.
Buenas tardes, good evening. Melissa y yo estamos aquí desde la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde y estaremos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea entre el inglés y el español. Melissa and I are here from Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. We will be providing simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. Si prefiere escuchar la sesión en español, por favor, seleccione el canal para español. Si usa una computadora, haga clic en el globito con interpretación. O si usa la aplicación de Zoom en su teléfono o tableta, haga clic en los 3 puntitos, luego interpretación de idiomas. luego español y finalizado. Y no se puede acceder a la interpretación a través de un Chromebook o Linux. If you do not understand Spanish, please make sure to select the channel for English. If you're on your computer, click on the globe that says interpretation, or on the Zoom app on your phone or tablet, you just click on the 3 dots, then English, then done. And interpretation is not available on Chromebook or Linux devices. Por favor, silencie su micrófono cuando no esté hablando. Y pedimos a todas las presentadoras que hablen claro y despacio, especialmente si están leyendo. Please mute your mic when you're not speaking, and we ask all presenters to speak slowly and clearly, especially if you are reading aloud. Gracias por ayudar a crear este espacio multilingüe. Thank you for helping to create this multilingual space.
Thank you very much, Megan and Melissa. Again, welcome everyone tonight to our panel discussion about what's really at stake for all of us with the judicial races this year. Indivisible Guilford County is co-sponsoring this event with 2 other organizations that work very hard for North Carolina, All on the Line and the New North Carolina Project. As we said before, if you could keep yourself muted, you'll be able to use the chat function later on if we have a Q&A session. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bree Bro from All on the Line. Bree is going to have some North Carolina Supreme Court trivia, as you see on our agenda, before we start the panel discussion, and we'll end up with some call to action from our organization. So,
Thanks, Kathy. Hey, y'all. It's great to be with you all tonight, and wonderful to see so many folks here interested in the stakes of our judicial elections. I'm going to launch a real quick little kind of trivia poll, and we'd love to invite you all to participate. It's just 3 questions. We'll leave it up for about a minute, and then we'll take a look and kind of walk through the answers together. So just take a few minutes if you're able to. Looks like I've launched it. Are folks okay? Cool. So read the questions, give us your best guesses. We just thought it would be fun to have a chance to just learn a little bit about the Supreme Court, particularly as we're looking forward to the elections in November. I see lots of participation. Thanks everyone who's participated. We'll give folks about 30 more seconds. Reminder to please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Just make sure that you're on mute. All right. We'll give it just another minute. Got about 60% participation. If anybody else would like to participate in our little quiz here, now's your chance. All right. Okay. Great. Thanks, everybody. Let's we'll end the poll and share the results, and we'll just walk through these. Can everyone see the results of the poll? Okay. So question number 1 looks like how many justices sit on the Supreme Court of North Carolina? Looks like 42% of folks that answered got it right. There are 7 justices on the Supreme Court of North Carolina. There are 6 associate justices and 1 chief justice. Currently, there are 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans on the Supreme Court of North Carolina. Question 2, there were 5,391,501 votes cast in the 2020 race for Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina. what was the margin of victory in that race? And 64% of y'all got it right. It was 401 votes. That's right. Out of over 5.3 million votes cast in that race, that race was won by 401 votes. Current sitting Chief Justice Paul Newby defeated Sherry Beasley, who's now running for North Carolina Senate, by 401 votes. And a little extra trivia there were over 140,000 people in North Carolina who voted but did not vote in that race. Third question, but great job, y'all. Everybody, looks like a lot of folks have heard that statistic before. How many seats on the Supreme Court of North Carolina are up for election this fall? And looks like a lot of folks know that there are 2 seats up for election that are going to be on our ballots, every ballot in North Carolina this fall. The folks that are running are Sam Ervin in seat 3, I believe, seat 5, I believe. He's running for re-election. Looking at my notes. He's running for a second 8-year term against Trey Allen. So Sam Ervin is a Democrat, Trey Allen is a Republican. They're running in seat 5. And Justice Robin Hudson is retiring. She's a Democrat who is retiring, and Lucy Inman, who's a Democrat, is running in seat 3 against Richard Deitz, who's a Republican. All right. So now I want to see. I think, Dylan, we can probably go ahead and take down the, all right, y'all, I'd like to now, we're gonna get started with our panel. Thank you all so much for participating in that, our fun little trivia. Sorry if you didn't see the questions. Sometimes the polls don't pop up on people's screens for some reason. But I'm gonna pass it over now to Celeste Cornelius. Celeste is gonna be our moderator tonight. She's a regional organizer with the New North Carolina Project who was instrumental in putting this event together. And we're very excited to have her moderating this event tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Celeste, to introduce yourself and get us going here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Celeste. I am a graduate and alum of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride. I see a lot of Aggies on here tonight. I also achieved a master's in government at Johns Hopkins, and I'm currently a law student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So this event was made for me because I have spent all day learning about the court system in Civ Pro. So everybody, we want you guys to participate in voting for judges because in North Carolina.
Hey, Celeste. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you talk a little slower? The interpreters are asking for a little bit slower.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I talk as fast as the lightning will let me. Okay, let me give everybody a second to catch up. And one of the beautiful things about North Carolina is that we elect judges at the district court judge level, the North Carolina Superior Court level, the North Carolina Court of Appeals level, and the North Carolina Supreme Court. After the North Carolina Supreme Court, you're going to the big Supreme Court, and we don't elect those people. So let's control what we can while we can by voting the entire ballot. Am I moving slow enough for the translator? Bree, are we moving slow enough? Okay, that's perfect. So now we're going to introduce you to our 5 panelists that are going to tell us about the importance of judges, the importance of voting down ballot, and what not electing good judges who are there to do the good things for all the good people are for. So let's start with Paul Garber. He is the current radio personality for WFDD, a current adjunct professor at Wake Forest, and a former justice reporter. Paul, can you go ahead and say hello to everybody?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction.
We're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay, next we have Ms. Romano. She is the head of Equality NC in the organizing director position. Tara, would you like to say hello to everybody and tell them maybe something about yourself?
So I am Tara Romano, she and her, and I'm the director of Pro-Choice North Carolina. So Yes, so we do abortion rights advocacy across the state. Thank you.
Everybody heard me, that is pro-choice North Carolina. Next is my professor from North Carolina A&T who got me into law and who was also my mock trial coach, Brenton J. Boyce, who is currently the practicing attorney at the Boyce firm in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yes, thank you for that introduction, Celeste. Glad to see everyone this evening. I think Celeste kind of introduced me well, so I'll keep it brief and say hello. Thank you.
Next, now we have the right person. Next, we have Mr. Posada coming to us from Equality NC, where he does serve as the organizing director. Mr. Posada, can you say hello to everybody?
Yes, buenas tardes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say a quick shout out to the organizers for having interpretation. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, next we have Billy Corriher. He is coming to us as a basic justice policy analyst. He can tell us everything about how the justices can affect our lives, how they can impact us, and what the courts do and how their decisions will impact and affect all of our lives.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. Hey, everybody. I'm Billy Corriher, he, him. And I worked for several years in Washington, D.C., working on judicial issues. But about 4 years ago, I moved back to North Carolina, where I'm from originally, so that I could focus on what's going on here with the North Carolina Supreme Court and other courts in North Carolina. And I look forward to speaking with everybody.
Well, panelists, we thank you all for being here tonight, and we are happy to have you. Everybody in the chat, please be willing to put questions in the chat as the speakers continue on. There will be people monitoring the chat, and as time permits, we will ask as many questions as we can from you all. Each panelist is going to get 2 questions asked by me. And again, if anything that you hear from those 2 questions inspires you to ask a question that you can better tell your network and better inspire your community with, please ask it and we will try to get to it. Panelists, is everybody ready? Okay. Paul, we are going to start with you. The North Carolina judicial system can be confusing for folks who don't follow the courts closely, which is a lot of us. Can you briefly describe how the court systems work, including the difference between state and federal courts, what kinds of cases are heard in the different courts, and which judges are appointed versus elected?
Sure. And if I could just say at the beginning, if I'm going too fast, interpreters, please let me know. So there are really 2 big differences between state and federal courts. One is the type of case heard and the other is scale. So the most basic difference is that state courts handle violations of state and local laws, whereas federal courts handle federal laws and constitutional issues. As for scale, state courts handle far, far more cases than federal courts do. And therefore, they're just far more state judges than federal ones. Federal judges are appointed, as has already been pointed out. State court judges are elected unless they're filling an expired term. Guilford is kind of weird in that we have 2 superior court courthouses. Lots of courts have satellite courts in other parts of the county, but it's highly unusual to hear, say, a murder trial in a location that is separate from the county seat, the main courthouse. But in Guilford, there is a superior court, not only in Greensboro, but also in High Point. I've covered that court, and it's that is extremely unusual. There are not many counties that have that additional courthouse. We have talked about a little bit about the judicial statewide elections. In the Supreme Court, Democrats currently hold a 4-3 majority. There are 2 Supreme Court seats that are up, Lucy Inman versus Richard Deitz, and Sam Ervin, the Democrat, versus Trey Allen, the Republican. There are also 4 Court of Appeals seats that are up. Locally, we have 3 judicial seats, a Superior Court seat in Guilford County, as well as 2 district court judgeships. They are all Democrats running unopposed in this November election.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Sure.
Right.
Let me just add one more quick point. And we talk about the importance of electing judges and the difference between the state and federal courts. Federal court judges are appointed, but typically have experience on the bench. So for example, Catherine Eagles is a federal district court judge here. She is also a former elected Guilford County Superior Court judge. So when you're voting for these local judgeships, understand that these are people who may go on to bigger things. That's something to keep in mind. I wanted to point out.
Absolutely. It continues to point out how every election is important. You have to vote every time for every election, because you never know what the next step is in somebody's political future.
Yes.
Paul, our next question for you. What threats to democracy do you see coming up, and what is the role of the judiciary in that?
There are a significant number of potential threats coming up. I'm a journalist. I'm worried about First Amendment threats that could end up in the courts, and some of the standing things that we're used to in terms of libel protection, for example, may be tested and may change significantly, which would alter our ability to hold people accountable if the libel situation gets much, if it gets much easier to be sued, for example. There's another case that I want to talk about, and that's called Moore v. Harper. That's a North Carolina case that the Supreme Court is likely to hear the next term. That term begins in October. Tim Moore, in this case, is the Moore in Moore versus Harper, and he is our current House Speaker. This all came out of the battles over redistricting. As you recall, we've had maps created by the GOP legislature that the state courts have ordered redrawn because they were gerrymandered along racial or partisan lines. And this has been going on essentially since the GOP took over the redrawing efforts when they took over the legislature in 2010 and are still in control. So although we are a famously kind of purple state, the legislature drew up a congressional map based on 2020 census figures that in a certain scenario would have given the GOP 10 of the state's 14 seats, even though, again, we're pretty evenly split along Democrat and Republican lines. The state court tossed that map, and for 2022, this upcoming election, we'll use a redrawn map, one that was already in place for the primary. The General Assembly appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court did not take the bait on that one. But some of the conservative justices were intrigued by the legislative leaders who argued that the Constitution gives the legislature, not the courts, the right to run elections. Now, that's known as the independent state legislature theory. The Supreme Court has never really considered that theory, and justices believe it's time to determine if the argument has merit. If passed, there are legal scholars who say that the courts would no longer have the power to protect voting rights, as they've done in several of the past elections, under state constitutions. And so both in this cycle and things that were previously done by the state courts, they may not be able to stop the legislature if the court takes this case and agrees with this independent state legislature theory. So again, that will be the next term, which begins in August, when they're going to, October rather, when they're going to consider that case, Moore v. Harper.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Garber. Okay, we're going to have Mr. Posada. What policies is your organization tracking in other states that could be in play after November if Governor Cooper veto is not protected? What is your greatest fear from state Supreme courts, given that the U.S. Supreme Court has recently done? Now, if you need me to repeat that question, I most definitely can.
No, thank you, Celeste, for the question. And before I go into it, I just want to, as a call agency, one of well, we're the largest and oldest statewide organization working for LGBTQ rights and protections in the nation. And one of our roles in completing our mission is, as Celeste mentioned, keeping a track of all these different policies, right? And a couple of the ones we're looking at are legislations that have come out of Arizona, Texas, Florida, among other states, that would target transgender youth in sports, that would limit or deny the ability for transgender folks to seek gender-affirming care. Of course, we've seen different bills like the Don't Say Gay bill. North Carolina recently was able to fight back our version of that bill. And not just that, we're also looking at policies that are created across the state that ideally would fight in the courts, right? As we all know, Governor Cooper would veto any of these proposals, and if we do not secure the General Assembly, in order to secure that veto, the Supreme Court will be our last line of defense, right? We're looking at ensuring that as we're going through this process, we're seeing, that we're electing candidates who are pro-equality. And what some of our bigger fears is, of course, seeing what happened with the Dobbs case, that the Supreme Court may throw back some of these protections and some of these already gained rights and protections to the state courts, right? And that's where the Supreme Court really comes into play in North Carolina as we're fighting to secure some of these rights. So, of course, among those, as I already mentioned, are just non-discrimination ordinances that we might have to fight in the courts. We're looking at in a possibility of having to litigate marriage equality at some point, just looking at the trajectory of the court now. So extremely important that we are electing judges and justices that are going to work for equality, equity, and justice.
Okay, that sounds like something that we need in North Carolina. My next question for you, what impact can the Supreme Court have on the LGBTQ community? And what legislation do you think would benefit these communities the most?
Yeah, of course, the court is poised to be a huge either help or hindrance for LGBTQ folks as we move forward, right? And it all depends on who we elect and who's on the bench when these different cases come up. And we're looking again at things like protection for trans youth, things like protections for gender affirming care. Of course, we're talking about, non-discrimination being put into law. So not just the Supreme Court of North Carolina, but we're also looking at down the ballot, all the justices and judges that we're being elected across the state. We need to make sure that folks are looking for, or we're electing folks who are pro-equality, right? Because whether it's someone at the Superior Court or at the District Court or at the Supreme Court, when folks coming into the courts, we need, LGBTQ folks or non-binary queer folks are showing up. We need to make sure that these justices are going to be acknowledging their humanity and their existence, and ensuring that we're not traumatizing our community even more from being in those spaces. As far as policies that we're fighting for, there's a wide array, right? We also know that the LGBTQ movement does not exist in a silo. We work closely with allies in the reproductive rights movement, and voting rights and immigrant rights, because all of these policies are if enacted, right, in an equitable representation in voting, when we are ensuring that women have the reproductive health care they need, and we're ensuring immigrant communities are safe and protected. And when we're ensuring that these non-discrimination ordinances and non-discrimination laws and gender affirming care is affirmed for our youth, that's when we are all, being more secure, and we acknowledge that we do not fight in a silo. So as we move forward, of course, we want to work with all of our allies, with everyone in these social justice movement, to ensure that we're protecting our LGBTQ folks along with everyone else in our community.
Thank you for that, Mr. Posada. Next, Ms. Romano, can you please explain to everyone what the Dobbs decision is that came down from the Supreme Court, and how that can and will impact North Carolina, especially if we don't have judges on the bench who are aiming to protect the rights of every North Carolinian?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. So I'm just going to very quickly make sure we all are level set on what the Dobbs decision, which came down on June 24th, and it was a case out of Mississippi, and it basically overturned Roe v. Wade. It overturned Roe v. Wade, which was a precedent in place for nearly 50 years that was ruled as like a workable compromise between people's right to make their own personal health and family decisions free from political interference, and balancing state interest in protecting fetal life, which what it was called, the compromise. And so that meant states could not arbitrarily ban abortion pre-viability, which is usually considered medically like around 24 weeks. And so states could not just outright ban abortion. Certainly states were able to, and they did, including in North Carolina, put medically unnecessary restrictions in place, but they could not outright ban abortion with Roe in place, Roe v. Wade. And so the Dobbs decision in June overturned that. And that it upended, of course, 50 years of legal precedent, took away a right from millions of people. And for North Carolina, in the short term, nothing changed the day Dobbs came down. We actually did not have a trigger ban in place that would automatically ban abortion if the Supreme Court ruled this way. We did not have a law on the books like a pre-Roe 1973 law, or we did not have like a 6-week ban on the books. So we were in a unique position for the Southeast. And we worked hard for that as advocates, doing, changing our political leadership, making sure political leadership understood what was at stake. Like, we worked hard to make sure that we're a state in the Southeast that has currently not banned abortion, but we don't know how long that's going to last. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about, how the state Supreme Court can impact abortion access here in North Carolina. And so one of the things is that what you're seeing now is that there is chaos in states around the country. Like, people, abortion bans are being put in place, they're being lifted. Getting even just reproductive health care, like miscarriage management, management for ectopic pregnancies, using certain medications when you're pregnant, this is all coming into creating a lot of confusion for healthcare systems, for providers, definitely for patients. And so what you're seeing is just like almost this sort of, and this is where the state courts can step in. So the US Supreme Court has had its say, and we should just not even bother asking them ever again about abortion, because they've had their say. As long as that court stays with that composition, that's going to be what they say. But state and federal courts are looking at things differently. So what you're seeing is like, states will go ahead and pass abortion restrictions in the light of the Dobbs decision. And then providers, clinics come in to go to the courts, to either the federal court or often also the state courts, to say, actually, you can't put this law in place. Here are the reasons why. And so then a court will go ahead and put an injunction, which means clinics were closed. And then the next week, clinics were opened. And then the next week, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you just slow down a little bit?
Yeah.
You're doing great. It's such good information. I just want to make sure everybody gets it. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. And I know I speak very fast. So basically it is that the courts are what is right now keeping abortion legal in a number of states, because it certainly isn't the anti-abortion legislatures in those states. So you've got like, this has happened in Wyoming, North Dakota, Georgia, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina. So what you're seeing is that state courts can play a role, and it shouldn't matter who is on the state court in terms of their ideology, because what we're looking for are judges and justices who can be fair and impartial, and who believe that we are all accountable to the rule of law, and that rule is applied fairly and equitably. So it is important who is on our courts, but what we're looking for are people who are fair and impartial. And that's how that's the state of abortion access in North Carolina right now, and what we're looking towards in terms of this state Supreme Court race.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So my next question for you is, how will the election of the courts impact civil rights and general rights, reproductive rights for anybody in North Carolina?
And that's a good question. I think one of the things is for people to understand like what we expect to happen in January 2023. No matter what happens with the election, the state legislative election, we're going to see anti-abortion leadership and lawmakers try to pass more restrictions. They keep talking about it, we know they're going to try and do it. And we hope that we can get a veto. We hope that we can get that veto upheld. But we're going to be preparing for new restrictions to pass. And if they do pass and become law, like they may end up before the state Supreme Court. And one of the things, just because the states can now ban or restrict abortion however they want, that doesn't mean all the laws that they pass will pass muster with the courts. And so one of the things about abortion access and reproductive rights is that there are a number of other rights that are connected. So you've got like privacy, the right to make personal health decisions, the right to travel, the right to share information, the right of, gender discrimination, gender non-discrimination. These are things that may come up in some of the laws that could be passed by the General Assembly here in North Carolina, and they may end up in front of the Supreme Court. And so there could be ways for the state Supreme Court to be looking at laws that really, based on our own state constitution or the state statutes we have in place, could be considered laws that are not workable or that are unconstitutional. And so even though this US Supreme Court feels like there's not much we can do, they've made their decision about Roe and about abortion access, but the state Supreme Court can be a place that we still can turn to look at laws that are blatantly unconstitutional or are blatantly attacking not just reproductive rights, but other rights that are intertwined with those rights. So that's one of the things that could be coming in front of the state Supreme Court, and why we're really concerned about, we really want to focus on the election for the state Supreme Court this year.
Thank you. Thank you for all the information. It was extremely knowledgeable and extremely impactful to me, and I consider myself to be quite informed. So I can only imagine what it did for our guests and participants tonight. Next up is Attorney Boyce. Attorney Boyce, I spent 2 years with you in classes, so I know you have something great for us. Can you tell us, how would you describe the impact of judges on our lives in 3 sentences or less? As a law professor and a practicing attorney, can you share an example of a time when a judge or judges protected or defended civil liberties?
Okay, I know the first part of that question is how judges impact our lives. They impact our lives first and foremost because they help us resolve disputes or dissolve disputes, right? That's the number one thing that judges do in our adversarial criminal justice system or legal justice system altogether, whether it be civil or criminal, is judges help us resolve disputes. So they are essentially the middleman or woman that sits there, and they determine matters, at least on the trial court level, they determine matters of admissibility of evidence. And when we talk about district court, not only do they determine matters of admissibility of evidence, but they actually are what we call the trier of fact, they're like the judge and jury in one, meaning they also determine guilt and innocence. So they help us resolve disputes, and that's the number one thing judges do. And you're going to be hard pressed to go through this life as a human being and not have some type of dispute that may reach court, whether it be a traffic ticket you get on the way to work in the morning. It's highly likely that you're going to touch that courthouse in some way. And the judges are, in some ways, they have the opportunity, if they take it, to be almost like an ambassador for the criminal justice system. So I hope that answered at least part of the question. And you asked how judges protect rights. The first thing judges do, just when we talk about the criminal justice process, the first thing they do is apprise people of their rights. They let them know that they have a right to an attorney, appointed or retained, and they also have the right to represent themselves. So the first thing judges do when we talk about first appearance court, the first thing they do on a daily basis is make sure people know what their rights are, that they have a right to an attorney. And they also let them know they have a right to remain silent. So they tell them to hush all the time. Stop talking, talk to your lawyer. So that's on a daily basis, I see judges protect those rights all the time. That's the right to an attorney and that Fifth Amendment right to remain silent.
Thank you, Attorney Boyce. It was actually Attorney Boyce and Law and Order that taught me about Miranda rights. And our second question for you, in your opinion, what makes a good judge? What should voters be looking for? What questions should they be asking about judicial candidates? And how can voters learn about judicial candidates to make an informed decision?
All right, one word, at least when we talk about trial attorneys, and that would be on the district court level or superior court level in North Carolina, is temperament. What is the temperament of that trial court judge? So the best way to know the temperament of a judge is to ask a practicing attorney. I know everyone doesn't have attorney friends, right? But there are attorneys all over the phone book. If you really want to become knowledgeable about what judges are doing in court, the best people to ask are attorneys. We are complainers. That's what we do for a living. We complain. So if you want to really know what's going on in the courthouse, always ask attorneys. If you're lucky enough to know one of us, ask us before you go to the polls. Hey, there are judges on the ballot. What should I do? What is the temperament of this judge? Also, another important, actually forgot to mention this in the last question. We talked about dispute resolution, but there's also the role of appellate court judges, right? So we have trial court judges who have to make legal decisions. Are they always right? No, they're not. But luckily, our Constitution and our system, we have what I call safety valves, and that safety valve is the appellate process. So that means you have a right to appeal whatever the judgment is at trial, and you get to take it a step higher and sometimes all the way to an appellate court, where at that point they're also resolving disputes, but they're resolving legal disputes, like what the law is and how the law is going to be applied. And sometimes they even set precedent, and that's the important part of going to the polls and voting for appellate judges and Supreme Court justices, because they're going to be setting the precedent, essentially telling us how the law is going to be applied in the future, or even overturning 50 years of precedent, as they did in the recent overturning of the Roe case. So another, when it comes to appellate court judges, most appellate court judges started off, I think I heard it earlier, they usually start off being trial court judges. They don't just come out of nowhere. They usually have a history of being a trial court judge at some level. So once again, you can still ask attorneys who practice in front of this judge, who may be a candidate on the ballot for an appellate court position, what was the temperament of this judge? Part of it's also partisan, right? So no matter what your political party is, knowing the political party of a judge may kind of let you know what he or she may be thinking, or what their political temperament may be from the bench, from the appellate court bench. So you can take that into account as well. So ask people who are in the profession, right? So if you're not a lawyer, you probably don't know what's going on in the courthouse, but the best person to ask would be a lawyer. Whether it's a civil lawyer or a criminal lawyer, always ask lawyers when it comes to those judicial ballots, getting to know who's on the ballot. You have to do your homework. Person like you, Celeste, who's around, you're in law school and you're around lawyers, me, and other people. So you can ask people. I know everyone doesn't have access to an attorney, but it's always good to ask one, or just to ask, what you should do on the ballot, and who's on the ballot, and what their temperament is.
Thank you for those answers. And yes, I call Attorney Boyce for all important issues in my life, like speeding tickets. I haven't gotten any. That's why I haven't called you recently about anything. Next is Billy. Mr. Corriher, we have a good question for you. How have politicians attempted to exert control and influence over the judiciary in North Carolina in the past? And how did citizens react?
And
Well, thank
Billy,
you. Yeah,
Billy, sorry, just a reminder for the interpreters, just
speak slow.
speak slow. Thanks.
Yeah, gotcha. So I guess I would start, 10 years ago, the Republicans took over the legislature, and that was the first time in more than a century that their party controlled the legislature. And at the time, there was a memo circulating among the Republicans, and I think the title was something like "How the Republican Party Can Stay in Power for 113 Years," which is how long the Democrats were in power before the Republicans. And this memo basically outlined a way for them to hang on to their gerrymandered election districts. They had recently gerrymandered Black communities across the state, Democratic voters across the state. And this memo was basically about how they could avoid the courts undoing their gerrymander, basically. One of the things this memo said was, lose the courts, lose the war. And the memo basically recommended that the legislature make all these changes to judicial elections, basically to help Republican candidates. And the first big change that they made was they got rid of our public financing for judicial elections. And this was a system that allowed judicial candidates to avoid raising large contributions from wealthy donors. And instead, they could raise a certain number of small donations, and then they would get this public funding. And it was a really popular program. We had Republicans and Democrats participating. And it really helped diversify our bench. A lot of candidates who didn't have connections to wealthy donors were able to run and win seats on our state Supreme Court and our Court of Appeals. But they got rid of this program. And then they made our judicial elections partisan. And we were the first state in about 100 years to make that move from nonpartisan to partisan elections. And then as the 2016 election approached, we knew that voters would have a chance to elect a progressive majority to the state Supreme Court. And the legislature was well aware as well. And so they basically tried to cancel the 2016 election before it happened. But their attempt to do that was struck down by the courts, and the election went forward, and voters did choose a progressive majority for the court. That was when we elected Mike Morgan to the court, and that created a 4-3 Democratic majority. And the legislature, the Republicans were very upset about this, as you can imagine, because now that meant their gerrymandered districts were at risk. And so they had an idea to actually pack the state Supreme, then allow Pat McCrory to fill those seats before he left office during the lame duck. But there was a huge outcry. Voters and activists were very angry. They packed the legislature to protest. There was a big outcry in the media, and the Republicans backed down. But they weren't done trying to pack the courts yet. In 2018, the legislature actually put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would have given them control over filling vacant seats on the judiciary. And it basically would have opened the door to yet another court packing scheme. But they had to get the voters to approve it. And also in 2018, there was a crucial Supreme Court election. Civil rights lawyer Anita Earls was running for a seat on the state Supreme Court. She had sued the legislature over their racial gerrymandering and voter suppression, and she had won in federal court. And now she was going to have a seat on the state Supreme Court where the court itself would have the power to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression. And the Republicans, they passed several laws intended to hurt her campaign. But fortunately, it wasn't up to the Republicans in the end, it was up to the voters. And in 2018, the voters across the state rejected the court packing amendment. I think there were only a handful of counties that approved it. And they put Anita Earls on the state Supreme Court, rejecting the legislature's attempts to
Hey, Billy,
ensure
you're,
that the Republican kept her seat. And since Earls has joined the court, She's made a big difference in voting rights cases and in criminal law cases. And there's more about, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me? No? You can't hear me?
You're breaking up a little, Billy.
Hello? Oh, sorry, I don't know what's going on.
Maybe turn off your video.
That's not better. Do you want to try leaving and coming back in?
While Billy is figuring that out, Amber, can we please get a question from the chat? You can just ask it out loud. I don't have to say it. You can turn your mic on.
One of the first questions that I saw in the chat was, what is judicial temperament and what qualities matter?
Attorney Boyce, I believe that's for you.
Yes, I actually answered it directly in the chat as well, but I'll answer it again. It's essentially how judges act towards the people, their approachability, and are they essentially fair? Do they listen to legal arguments? Are they open? And because sometimes you have a little bit of stubbornness from the bench, and we work hard as attorneys creating our legal argument and prepare court, and we listen to everyone. Always want to know the law, walking always right, but get right is essentially how you treat people that are coming into the house and using the courthouse. So that is implement.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Our next question from the chat. This is for Attorney Boyce or anyone who possibly has this answer, because I just met the North Carolina Bar Association and know nothing about this, so I have something to ask them next. Does the NC Bar Association publish information about the individual judges as attorneys, as people formally elected to the bench, anything about them, their behavior or their rulings on certain decisions?
I know they put out questionnaires. I don't know whether or not they publish it. In my practice, I don't like to pay attention and really partake in those. I want judges to come to work every day and do their job to the best of their ability. I don't like applying pressure. Because a lot of times judges really they really pay attention to that stuff. If they're not popular or if they rank at the bottom, and I don't want anything like that to affect them. So I don't participate in it, but I know they do. They actually do take polls and questionnaires from the bar locally. So I know that happens. I don't know exactly what organization is behind it. Like I said, I never pay attention to it. I pay attention to what judges do in the courtrooms in front of me and what I see personally. But I've never been a fan of those polls and questionnaires that they send out. But it does happen though.
Thank you. And our next question, it will be for pro-choice. Yes.
I think Billy's back. Should we let him see if he wants to finish?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think I basically finished answering your first question, Celeste. Basically, in 2018, the voters rejected the court packing plan, and they put Anita Earls on the state Supreme Court. She is a civil rights rock star, and she's been really crucial for voting rights and for criminal justice issues since she's been on the court. Yeah, so that's the first question.
Okay. Billy, my next question for you. You follow both North Carolina courts and redistricting closely. This year, the North Carolina Supreme Court rejected gerrymandered maps and ordered them redrawn. The congressional maps that were ultimately drawn by a panel of 3 retired judges are some of the fairest we've seen in North Carolina. Can you talk about the status and how they might be impacted by this year's election?
Yes, absolutely. Well, basically, as you mentioned, the court struck down the gerrymandered maps that the legislature tried to implement. And we have a much better set of election districts now that the courts have intervened. And that was only possible because the voters protected the courts in 2016 and 2018. The voters protected the courts, and then the courts protected the voters by cracking down on gerrymandering. But the issue with the congressional districts is that these districts are only temporary. And next year, the legislature is going to have to redraw them again. And basically, we can guarantee that if Republicans have a majority in the legislature, they're going to try to gerrymander again. We've seen it over and over again. And so the fact is the state Supreme Court is going to be crucial again next year. And that's why this year's election is so crucial for people that are concerned about having fair election districts, districts that don't discriminate against one party or another, or one group of voters or another. It's going to be all up to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And we saw it, after the court intervened back in February, we saw Republicans say, if we elect a Republican majority to the state Supreme Court, we're going to overturn that decision. We're going to stop cracking down on gerrymandering. Basically, they said that they're going to make gerrymandering legal again if they have a majority on the state Supreme Court to do that. So I think that needs to be on the minds of voters as they think about the Supreme Court election this year.
Thank you for that insight. Now, I have a question for the reporters on this panel, the attorneys, if they know it. Pro-Choice North Carolina is on the call, so I'm pretty sure they will be able to answer this question. Ms. Romano, did the 20-week abortion ban overturning come from the state Supreme Court or a federal court?
That's a great question. And that was a federal judge. So that was somebody who was appointed to that bench. And so yeah, that didn't have anything to do with our state courts.
Thank you. And this can be a question for all on the line or New North Carolina Project or reporters as well. Now that many North Carolinians are unaffiliated, can a judge run as unaffiliated as well without picking a party?
Yeah, they should be able to run independently. I mentioned in the chat that a lot of people who are unaffiliated aren't really politically independent. There are reasons, because in a primary in North Carolina, an unaffiliated person can vote in either a Democrat or Republican primary. They can't split votes like you can in a general election. But a lot of people may just, if they're in say they're Republicans and they're in a deep blue place like Greensboro, they might want to vote in the primary for certain Democrats that they may perceive to be as more moderate or sympathetic to their cause, and then vote differently in the general election. So yeah, it's true that unaffiliated voters have surged in the last couple of years, but there are strategic reasons for that, not just people being independently minded. I'll just throw that out there. But you don't necessarily, you can run independent.
Bree, I have 2 more questions from the chat. Do we have time to ask them?
We do, yeah. And I've got one more that was DM'd to me. So you go first.
Okay. My first question from the chat, this is for everybody on the panel. I might even be able to offer a piece of it. How do judges' independent biases affect their decisions, and are judges political? Are judges political? Yes, that was their question. So how do biases affect judges' decisions, and are they political?
If I can chime in, the short answer is they're not supposed to be, but we can't we can't realistically believe that a judge leaves their politics at the door when they come into work, or their personal beliefs. In practice, we would like for them to, right? Even as an attorney, we're kind of duty bound to be fair and kind of approach each client as they come, and leave our own personal thoughts to ourselves. But in real life, we don't always do that, right? So we would like for them to leave who they are at the door, but that's kind of unrealistic. And of course, it is a political position, right? So if you have to think about it, if you're elected to a position, that means you kind of almost have a duty to the people to kind of get, if you want to get back in the office and win again, it kind of changes who you are. It may affect how you answer certain questions, right? So you definitely at least have to polish how you are. Sometimes I can see it being that way because you're on the ballot. So I think it's unrealistic to believe they leave everything at the door, but that's just my opinion.
Does anybody else want to chime in on this? My piece that I would chime in is the courts were supposed to be apolitical, but after the Dred Scott decision, which happened pre-1865, if you know what happened pre-1865, if you know what America was doing pre-1865, that is how long the courts have been considered political bodies. So pre-1865 and the Dred Scott decision is when most political scientists decided that the courts became a political body. I might have just given you homework. Anybody else have any parts they want to chime in about judges' bias, and are they political? Yes, you can just go ahead. I see you, Ms. Romano.
You go ahead.
The
Yeah.
second.
Sorry, just chime in. Wanna just chime in a little bit on the second part of that question, like how do we know these judges will be, using their power for good, let's say that, or at least for fairness. Many organizations are out there, and I think a couple of folks have already put them into the chat, but there's a lot of organizations who are looking at the judges and justices' backgrounds as to how they voted, what have they said in court, what are they saying out on the campaign trail. And as I already mentioned, of course, we would love justices and judges to be apolitical. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. It is a political position. Therefore, their politics does matter. So, and as part of this political process, as anyone who has participated in kind of like the back end, right, in the running for office and the having some working campaigns, that all these justices fill out questionnaires for different endorsements. And there's a multitude of organizations who are endorsing candidates for different courts, whether it's at the local at the district up to the Supreme Court level. So a great way of knowing where these justices stand and what they will bring into their courtroom is not only looking at how and decisions they've made in the past, but also looking at some of these trusted organizations that and already support and see who they're supporting and who they're endorsing, because that'll play a big role as we move into educating our communities. And we also know that not all of us have the time to go in and dive deep into every single record and seeing who they are and how long they've served and what's their stance on XYZ. So trust the organizations that you're already supporting, and go to them to get some information as to who they're endorsing, who they're doing some work for, and chime in.
We have one more question that was sent to me. You guys, I know this can be a little triggering because a lot of us like to remain in a bubble of optimism, but if you don't feel comfortable answering, you can just tell us. The question is, what is your greatest fear if we do not get judges that plan to fight for the people and all of their civil rights? The all is capitalized. You guys can answer at will.
Well, my biggest fear is 10 more years of what we've seen so far happening in Raleigh. More anti-trans bathroom bills, more anti-abortion bills, more voter suppression bills. And if we don't have a state Supreme Court that's going to stop it, I think a lot more of those bills could actually go into effect this time around. And if they're able to gerrymander themselves into power for another decade, it'll be very hard to do anything about it. But we have the chance this year in this year's election to do something about it.
And just to piggyback off of that, right? We've seen the radicalness of our legislature, and obviously, I don't like to spend, and like I believe most of us don't like to spend a lot of time in this doom and gloom phase. But we have to be realistic, right? In many cases, our futures are on the line with these elections, right? We're looking at the protections for our young people. We're looking at healthcare. We're looking at a choice. We're looking at ability to vote. We're looking at a multitude of issues that are going to come before these courts, and we have to do something about it. If that doesn't energize you, look at what Republicans have wanted to pass, or at least have tried to pass in this last session and been able to put a stop to it. Now imagine all of that actually going through and having a Supreme Court who's not going to have the people's back, right? They're going to be supporting these radical positions. So as I already mentioned, right, there's a huge deal on the line, but I also like to say that, well, that is something that we should be worried about. There's also great candidates. There's great people who are trying to fight for our community, who are trying to step into these positions and be voices for equity, right? Be voices for justice, and it is our role, if you are of course, recognize the importance and some of the possibilities, right? Recognize that this could be devastating if we don't get the right people in, and then use that to mobilize your communities to come out and vote. Call your friends, make a plan yourself, make sure that you're registering people, make sure you're telling people about this and the importance of these races, because it doesn't help anyone if we just stand and sit in the doom and gloom and just. We need to use that. We need to harness that power that we have to push people and let them know, like, if you do not want to see, voting rights limited even more, if you don't want to see our LGBTQ community continue to be attacked, if you don't want to see the erosion of the right to choose in North Carolina, if you don't want to see the erosion of so many issues that are impacting our communities across the state, we need to make sure we go out and vote.
I'd like to contribute, but I'm not a panelist, so I don't know if it's appropriate.
I remember this is a C3 event. We cannot endorse anybody, and we cannot speak directly for one political party or another. And as long as your views stay within that realm and it's positive, I don't see why not.
Okay, I'll be more careful than I intended. I'm also an attorney, and I am grateful for this wonderful session that you guys have put on, and highlighting the centrality of the judicial branch, noting that, of course, it's one of 3 branches of government, so it has a special place. It would also be useful to have similar things on the role of governors, secretaries of state, all the state legislators, of state treasurers, local school boards, local election officials, and so on. And because all of these positions these days are important. And my fears are not only are all the freedoms at risk that we've come to rely on, but also the survival of the planet is at risk as we go forward. And so I think urging people to look at every office and closely, and to get everybody they know to vote, so that all of us, no matter how we live or love or look like, that we are included in the protections that are at risk these days. Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you, Attorney Travis, for what you said. Bree, I am going to pass it to you, but just echoing what she said, judges are usually at the bottom of the ballot or on the back of the ballot. So please remember to vote down ballot and also remember to flip it over. You don't want it to be like when you were in 5th grade, took a test and everybody started talking about the back of the page and you say what back of the page because you never flipped it over to the back. That is something that I learned the hard way when Ms. Chapman gave me a big goose egg on the back of my paper.
By the way, I think Bree might have dropped off, but I could
No,
be.
I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Trying to keep up with the chat. Thanks, Carol, and thanks, Celeste. I want to, we had actually planned on this being an hour and a half event. So we're not over time technically, but I know that we want to start wrapping up. And before we do that, there are some questions still in the chat that we haven't had a chance to answer. We will try to get those answers for y'all and include it in a follow-up email, some of the questions and some resources that folks have dropped into the chat. And before we do that, I want to invite, we just want to invite the host organizations that put this together to share some calls to action around, what we can be doing to help, just get the word out about this election, the judicial elections and everything, everything on the ballot. Just we've got some folks here from the New North Carolina Project and Indivisible Guilford County. So Kay, were you prepared did you want to share, or Kristen?
I am. And Kristen, if I miss anything, you can let me know. I know that Kristen is fantastic about all of the links and everything that have been dropped in the chat, telling people how they can participate. I am a lifelong fan and supporter of our partners at Indivisible too, and have learned alongside of them over the years, and I'm super thankful for all of you and all on the line. So I'll keep it quick, but hopefully as effective as possible. We need your help. So the work that goes in elections does not just happen. It cannot be a spectator sport. We need every person to do at least one thing every time, every election. We have a lot of people that were here on the call today. And there are thousands of people that are in our community that weren't on the call. So we need you to go and talk to them. We do that through phone banking, we text bank, we canvass and knock on doors, and we're absolutely excited, happy, and elated anytime any of our partners or anytime anyone in the community wants to come out with us. We're looking to make voters that vote lifelong in every election, every time. And we cannot do that without you all. So I will drop a couple of links in the chat. Again, thank you all for coming, because y'all could have been doing a lot of things, but you came here to do this thing with us. And I would like to say, I think that makes you super awesome sauce. And I think that the team would agree. So please sign up. We've dropped some of our links there. This is not the first time we've partnered with these organizations, and it won't be our last time, right? So we want to keep this going. We had some folks that are on this call, not on this call, that some folks with our values maybe lost elections by like 400 votes, 100 votes. So it's important that we're out knocking on doors, engaging with people, and showing up the best way that we can show up. There isn't an amount of volunteering that's too much or too small. Just as long as you come, we need you, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you, Kay, and +1 to all of that. Especially, if you're on this call, just recognizing how many people you personally can touch just from the people that you know or you're connected to in your life, in church or in your neighborhood or on social media. And that's part of why we wanted to put something like this together, was to give folks, context and talking points for the judicial elections in particular, but also to invite you to, come and join our efforts. The New North Carolina Project is out there. I mean, y'all look at their Mobilize. They are all over the place. Wherever you are, you can get involved with them. I think Dylan has dropped a document that we put together that has contact information for all of the organizations that were on this call, including panelists and the host organizations. All on the Line is also going to be doing more partnering with these folks and others to do more events and also some direct voter outreach. We've got some postcards to share with voters particularly in Guilford County, to make sure that they're aware of the difference between the maps that they would have gotten if the Supreme Court hadn't overturned those crazy unfair maps. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of ways to get engaged, and we would love to have y'all as well. Thanks, Dylan, for dropping that doc. We will keep updating that as well. So if folks want to click on it, and it will also be included in a follow-up email, and you can keep going back to that, and we'll add resources to it, including some stuff from the chat. We had great conversation in the chat. Thank you all so much for engaging. And I want to pass it over to Kathy to share anything about Indivisible Guilford.
Indivisible Guilford County, we love best when we partner with people like All on the Line and the New North Carolina Project. It's just, when we work together, it's great. We're doing lots of things, some of them in partnerships, mainly focused on getting out the vote and educating voters on issues like we did tonight. So we have lots of many things to choose from, between canvassing and writing to voters, doing educational programs. I've put our contact information in the chat. There's an email and our social media information. So email us. We send out a weekly newsletter that just has a nice list of all the possibilities and opportunities. So please join us. And I guess with that, we're ready to wrap up. First of all, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank our great panelists. You shared so much knowledge and so much passion for your work, and it really came through. We all appreciate the work that you do, and tonight I think you've given all of us a much better understanding of what's at stake in November with the judiciary. So thank you all for that. And I guess we'll say goodnight to everyone.
Did we mention the movie night for anybody that's in Guilford?
Yes, we have a follow-on, a companion event with our partners for this session this Thursday night at 6:30 in the Kathleen Clay Price branch of the Greensboro Library. We're showing the movie Selma. And that event is shown on our Facebook page also. And I forgot to mention that Saturday morning, we have a Get Out the Vote kickoff event in partnership with some other organizations at the Guilford County Democratic Headquarters, if anyone would like to come out and get started with that. Thanks for the reminder, Bree. So good night, everybody, and thank you so much.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, y'all.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Thank you.